Good afternoon. This is Rick Manning, President of Americans for Limited Government, coming to you live from Washington, actually Fairfax, Virginia, here in Americans for Limited Government headquarters. Just wanted to touch base on three things that are going on right now that I think you need to know about. A couple of them we've talked a little bit about, and one of them is kind of new for us to discuss. But I'm going to start out with the vaccine mandate. Spoke extensively about it on Thursday and Friday. We've written a ton about it. Go to getliberty.org or dailytorch.com, the blog site, and there's a lot of great content there on the vaccine mandate. One of the things, though, that we put out today that I think people would be interested in is Governor Henry McMaster of South Carolina came out with a really, really strong statement opposing the vaccine mandate. And South Carolina, what most people don't realize is that Occupational Safety Health Administration has some states have decided to take over administration of OSHA in their state. And what that means is something very, very important. It means that the state is actually responsible for doing the administration of the rules. So consequently, if a state says we don't find that rule to be constitutional, or they can essentially just say, well, we're not enforcing it. There are no federal OSHA inspectors in those states. The federal government has no OSHA power in those states. And as a result, a state like South Carolina has the capacity to say, we're not going to, we don't think that this is constitutional, and we are not going to enforce it until it's proven to be constitutional, and be perfectly within their rights to not enforce the vaccine mandate under those circumstances. There are 22 states with state OSHAs. I'm going to give you the ones that are most likely, where you have Republicans as governor and you have Republican legislatures. So you've got the most likely ability of a state to say of a governor to tell their state OSHA, which works for the governor again. So to tell their state OSHA that they're not going to enforce any vaccine mandate until the constitutionality of that mandate is proven. States like Alaska, Wyoming, Arizona, Iowa, Indiana, Tennessee, South Carolina again, and Utah are all Republican dominant states with their own state OSHA, and with that autonomy that states that don't have their state OSHA don't enjoy. So if you live in one of those states, it would probably be wise to let your governors know that you would hope that they would actually take action to oppose the vaccine mandate, and to instruct the state OSHA not to take any action related to it until the constitutionality of it has been proven. And the second question then becomes, can the federal government, even if it's proven to be constitutional, compel a state to enforce it? Truth is, there's a lot of precedent that says they can't. Take remember back when the state of California declared themselves a sanctuary state on immigration and said, we're not only not going to help enforce immigration laws, we're going to obstruct the federal government's ability to enforce immigration laws in our state. Well, that went to the Supreme Court because Attorney General Jeff Sessions attempted to cut off funding for certain elements to California for things like the 100,000 cop program, which California localities get a lot of money from the federal government. And Jeff Sessions says, well, if you're not going to enforce the law, then why are we paying your law enforcement expenses? Reasonable question. And the Supreme Court held that the money still had to go through to California under those circumstances. So given that, it's pretty clear that the situation is almost identically the same, except for the difference that this is a mandate there's a stroke of a pen mandate that hasn't gone through any regular process, hasn't been voted on by anybody, and is merely a presidential edict rather than even a regulation which went through the comments and all the various problems that a regulation has, hurdles it has to overcome in order to become a regulatory law. This didn't have to go through any of those hurdles because it basically is a stroke of a pen edict that Joe Biden thinks everybody should have to comply with. truth is, the edict probably will not survive judicial scrutiny. But even if it does, the states that have their own OSHA have a strong leg to stand on in terms of rejecting it and being enforced in their own states. So that's something to look for. We've got an article on that on dailytorch.com. I suggest you go there. It's our lead article right now. And it includes a very strong statement by Governor Henry McMaster of South Carolina opposing the vaccine mandates. So, one of the things that this is doing is we're attempting to get those governors to say, hey, we're not enforcing this until it's constitutionally proven. And even then, we are going to take a hard look at whether or not we should be enforcing it at all, protecting the citizens of their states from this Biden overreach. So that's a bit of good news. It's a place that's a little tactical. It's a little bit in the weeds, but I think it's something you wanted to know about. People are watching this are very savvy about what's going on. And this is an area that very few people have discussed. I happen to know about it because I worked in the Department of Labor under George W. Bush as a chief of staff public affairs. And so we did OSHA stuff all the time and had to get to know a little bit how the agencies worked. And the state agencies, truthfully, have absolute power in their states relating to enforcing OSHA laws. So as a federal OSHA, if something happened in a state like Nevada, which is a state OSHA, we didn't even respond to media on it because there was no reason to. We just said, this isn't our responsibility. This is state of Nevada's responsibility. And that's how it works. And because of that, it's a glimmer of hope for those states that have a state OSHA to opt out, and the 8 states which I named with Republicans, governor, Republican legislatures, all have a capacity to stand firm and reject Biden's vaccine mandate altogether. And that's exactly what they should do. So if you want to learn more, so that's one of the things here. Now it says at the bottom here, scrolling across the bottom, that I'm going to talk about the Trafalgar Group poll. Poll just came out, and it shows overwhelming support, opposition to that, rather, to the vaccine mandate. 58% to 29% oppose the vaccine mandate. That's a 2-to-1 opposition for the vaccine mandate nationwide. There's a 16 bet there that we ought to have. Governors should take action to stop the vaccine mandate. And so there's support for governors taking action. There's support for for people believing the vaccine mandate is unconstitutional. And as a result, the vaccine mandate is not a very popular thing right now in America. So that's something which is important to share. Once again, that article on dailytorch.com has a link to that poll, and feel free to share that with your elected officials, because that poll is going to be shows that not only are we loud about opposing this, but the majority of the people feel the same way that we do and want to be protected from this mandate. Let's talk a little bit about the mandate and some of the peculiarities of it, because there are some issues in here that I think people are beginning to catch on to. Number one, police unions are beginning to come out strongly opposed to it. Why? It breaks their contract. It essentially breaks the contract they have with the localities, which mandate what a firing offense is. And as a result, they're strongly opposed to this. I suspect we're going to see a lot of private sector unions also taking that same stance. Imagine the United Auto Workers suddenly having 30% of their members being fired by an automobile company because they didn't have a vaccine, and they're losing 30% of their dues as a result. I don't think they'd like that very much. So even if they'd want to support the Biden administration, they'd have to support their own members in this case. And as a result, I think that their ship that actually supported them. What's more, you have on the public sector, you have unions like the AFSCME union. Here's what the problem that they have on the federal government side, where they say they want to fire the federal workers who are not vaccinated. The problem is simple. The civil service laws don't allow you to do it. And if the public employee unions who represent the people who are GS 12 or below, so the middle to lower earning members of the federal workforce, they aren't going to tolerate their members being fired over a vaccine mandate. Because if that were to occur, a future president could basically come up with anything under the guise of an emergency to fire the federal workforce. Now, let's be clear. Americans for Limited Government has been in favor of something called the Merit Act, which says essentially that if you are not capable of doing your job, if you're a federal employee, you're not capable of doing your job, you're incompetent, you're lazy, so you won't do your job, or you're recalcitrant, meaning you refuse to do your job even though you could do it, that you should be able to be fired in an expedited fashion. But that's all performance-based. That's based on whether or not you're actually a useful expenditure of taxpayer dollars. And there's no reason to have people who refuse to do their job or can't do their job to be protected under the Civil Service Code. So we support the Merit Act and have been strong advocates for it and have worked our tails off trying to get that put into law. But this is not the Merit Act. This is a edict by a president saying, well, if you don't do what I want you to do and get a vaccine, no matter what reason you have for not giving it, even including, I don't feel it's the right thing for me, your personal choice, we're going to fire you. Imagine if you took that same approach on other health issues. For instance, those of us who are old enough to remember the AIDS scare. Imagine a president had said during the AIDS scare, well, this is a communicative disease that kills people, and so anybody who's susceptible to getting AIDS is going to be fired. Well, guess what? I suspect there'd be a pretty strong backlash from the gay community on that, because it would have been a carte blanche to fire gay people. And that's what would have happened. You would have had uproar and outrage from the left. There's really no difference in these two circumstances. And so, it's kind of situational ethics here, but nobody said that targeting people with AIDS, gay people who were susceptible to get AIDS. Nobody said that. So let's just be clear. This is a vaccine mandate that is a coercive attempt to get people to take vaccines. The federal government's admitted it. Ron Klain's admitted it, the chief of staff. Basically, they've said, whether it's found constitutional or not, if we coerced 10 million people to get a vaccine, then we've accomplished our purpose. So they don't care about the law. They don't care about the constitutionality. This is about coercing people to take an action that they want them to take and nothing more. And so we have to just deal with it. It's a power play. Let's talk about something else real quick. I don't know how much you guys have been following what's happening in the Middle East, but it's pretty disturbing. A couple of things that I want to specifically talk about. We all know about the military equipment that was left behind, and the Taliban's riding around in our Black Hawk helicopters and in our Humvees and the like, carrying our weapons, wearing our uniforms. We all know that that's occurred. We all know that highly sensitive personal tracking devices have been left. We all know night vision devices have been left. That the Taliban is the best suited. Is basically the best equipped organization, terrorist organization in the world right now. And it's directly because Joe Biden gave them the stuff through an agreement that Secretary of State Blinken owns 100%. It's why we've called for Blinken to be impeached. And there's nothing that he's said that's changed my mind at all in terms of his culpability and why he should be impeached for this. But there's something else that's going on that's been reported over the weekend, and that is that in Turkmenistan, which is directly north of Afghanistan, we have bases. We had a base there have a base there where we had been launching airstrikes from, and resupply routes and providing resupplies and the like to actually be in Afghanistan all these years. Well, we have a lot of airplanes, a lot of helicopters, a lot of equipment there, and it is being reported by some who I trust that the Blinken is in the process of negotiating giving away that materiel to the Taliban as well. This isn't in territory they control. This is in no way, shape, or form in any area they control. It's in another country. And apparently our government is not happy with the massive amount of military materiel that we provided them. Not happy that we basically bowed down to the Taliban in terms of allowing who gets to leave the country and who doesn't get to leave the country. Not happy with any of that result. They're now looking to supply the Taliban with material, with military armament that's based in another country. Now, I'm hoping this isn't true, but it is something that's being reported by people who are very close to the intelligence community. And so I have every reason to believe it is true. What's more, in Saudi Arabia, our government is removing missiles from Saudi Arabia, essentially disarming Saudi Arabia at a time when we are arming the Al-Qaeda and the de facto, since Iran's going to have the access to the Taliban equipment, Iran. We're providing Iran with all sorts of money. We're providing Iran with assets. They got their assets back that they're able to access now. So we're basically strengthening the Iranian regime, and we're weakening the Saudi government. Why does that matter? It matters because the entire of the Abrahamic Accords were built around bringing Saudi Arabia and Israel into alignment. You have United Arab Emirates on one side of Israel. You have Jordan, who's an ally of Israel, at least neutral. You have Saudi Arabia, which is now allowing Israeli flights over to UAE, which is on the other side of Saudi Arabia from Israel. So you've got this whole regional thing going on. You've got Egypt as part of it to the south. And it's all part of a kind of building a kind of a line of defense against the Iranians moving south. Iran desperately wants to take over Mecca and Medina, which are the two holiest places of the Islamic world. And they want to take Jerusalem because that means they're driving out the Jews, number one. And that is the historical battle that they continually fight. So that's what you have. We are now, not only are we arming the Al-Qaeda and providing cash money for the Taliban, and basically providing Iran access to their resources that were embargoed before. Now we're also taking away the ability for Saudi Arabia to defend itself. This is a Saudi Arabia whose prince has announced really massive kind of reforms to try to modernize the country. And quite honestly, in Saudi Arabia, there's a lot of people who want to kill him over that. And has been truly the most Western of the Saudi kings. He's not king yet, but he's king in waiting. And so we, in response, are basically supporting the most radical jihadis who desperately want to get a hold of Mecca and Medina. And as a result, we're supporting them by virtue of taking away missile defense from Saudi Arabia. It may sound crazy, but folks, sure as heck looks like we've switched sides. Sure as heck looks like we've switched sides in that fight, and we are suddenly fighting with the people who want to subjugate and defeat Israel. And there's really no way you can look at it in any other way. One last little piece on this. Under President Trump, there's a tribe in Yemen called the Houthis. And it's not Houthi with a blowfish, and I may not be pronouncing it right. It's Houthi. So I call them the Houthis. They could be something else, maybe a Darius Rucker reference. But the point is, they were fighting an insurgency war being funded by Iran against the country of Yemen. And the United States was supporting the Yemenis government, the legitimate Yemenis government, against this revolution. The Iranians were supporting the Houthis. So what did Biden do immediately? He basically dropped support for Yemen and the restrictions that were put in place on the Houthis, and gave them permission to effectively begin attacking the Yemenis government again. Why this matters is Yemen is One of the points that has the ability to block oil from Saudi Arabia to reaching the Western world. There's two little choke points. One's the Straits of Hormuz, and one's the strait that goes to the Arabian Sea, and it comes out of the Arabian Sea, and and Yemen is a choke point. So if the Houthis take over Yemen, suddenly there's a capacity to choke off all oil flowing from Saudi Arabia to anywhere in the world, because it's dependent upon two very narrow sea passages, the way most of the oil tankers get through. And that is a very dangerous situation. So once again, we have the Biden administration playing fire by really trying to undermine it. From an international perspective thing, and why are we even involved? Why do we care? That's a legitimate question, and I'll answer why we care about Saudi Arabia very directly. In 1973, the oil embargo occurred and basically disrupted our economy pretty greatly. Those of us who were alive then can remember the lines, the odd even days, and the like. What ended up happening out of that was Saudi Arabia made a deal with the United States, and it was reaffirmed during the Clinton administration. And it was a deal that they would buy, all oil would be sold from Saudi Arabia, which was the major oil producer in the world. All Saudi oil would be purchased with dollars, and it's called a petrodollar. And why that matters is that is kind of makes the dollar the international currency for trade. And being the international currency for trade has provided America with certain advantages. And those advantages are all the countries in the world need to stock up on dollars, because dollars are the one thing that will always spend. And so a lot of the banks around the world, the sovereign banks around the world, own a lot of U.S. Treasury bonds. They own, in fact, that's one of the places most of our U.S. Treasury bonds are not owned by China. They own 1 billion. We've got 27 billion out there. They're owned by countries all over the world, Japan, Belgium. You just go through, and a lot of countries own billion plus of U.S. treasuries. And the reason is because we are the world reserve currency. If Saudi Arabia is coerced because China says, we can save you, and the U.S. can't and won't, the U.S. has abandoned you, and they go to the Saudi government and say, hey, have petrodollars become petro yuan, the Chinese currency. Suddenly, all those countries that have to buy U.S. dollars will be dumping them on the marketplace, creating essentially a crash in the demand for dollars, because there won't be anybody who needs them, and there'll be lots of them available. And that's the recipe for massive spikes in interest rates, and a recipe for massive inflation increases. So this relationship we have with Saudi Arabia is essential to our survival as the premier world power in the world. Because, folks, we've run up unsustainable debt for years. Time after time, we just keep blowing by the debt ceiling and not even breathing hard. And at some point, the piper has to be paid. Being the world reserve currency has delayed that in the hopes that someday we'll get our fiscal house in order. The minute we lose that, we will face extraordinarily difficult times in terms of our country, because we will end up defaulting on those loans. And when we default, and China's coming in with yuan through their because of the trade deficit we have with them, so we give them lots of dollars. When they come in and use those dollars to purchase friends around the world, we won't have a leg to stand on because we defaulted. So this has massive implications, and it's not something we want. And Joe Biden needs to figure it out, because right now you really have to wonder, whose side are we on? So, and that's something I wanted to make you aware of. It's a tough issue. I hate it, but the fact is, we are in perilous times, and the Biden administration through every one of their actions is behaving like they're not on, that we've switched sides. And that is dangerous for America in the future. One last issue is going to be real short that I want to bring up. We're going to talk about this a lot more in the future. There's a proposal that the Biden administration has that goes into the $3.5 trillion bill that they're trying to pass. And it's a proposal which is very dangerous. What it would do is it would allow for the government to track, it would compel banks to provide information on every transaction from accounts that were more than $600, had more than $600 in them. Now, why would the Biden administration want that level of detail in terms of tracking it? And the truth is, they can't, the Democrats in the Senate can't say they don't know about it, because they voted an amendment on the floor, 50-49, all Democrats voting no on this amendment to make it so that provision went away. And so that provision is in the $3.5 trillion budget bill that exists. So why would the Biden administration want to be able to track any account, all transactions out of any account down to a $600 level? That's how large the account is, not how large the transaction is. The answer is pretty simple. We're in the midst with this vaccine thing of watching vaccine, Trump support, we've seen the shadow banning, the Facebook shadow banning, the Twitter banning people, the Google basically skewing results. We're in the process of defining who the elites are, who the people are entitled to rights, and who the people aren't entitled to rights in this country. The vaccine mandate is part of that process, and it's dangerous because of it, and that's one of the reasons we're fighting it so hard. This unbanking idea is another one, being able to track bank accounts, because the minute that they can basically say, okay, well, they know what you're spending your money on. They can say to the bank, don't allow any transaction for this person to do this. For instance, purchase a gun. They can say no transaction should be approved to gun shops. We've already seen credit card companies begin that process, but they could do this at the bank level. And so they can say there are so many different ramifications of this. The only thing that can be derived from it is an attempt to take control of the monetary piece of the Chinese civil where they track everybody and they deny you rights based upon how compliant you are with the government. They do that in China now. The Biden administration, this is just one more step that the Biden administration is taking to be able to do it here. And we need to be all over this and tell our members of Congress that this is not acceptable, that it must be defeated, and it cannot be part of any package that passes Congress related to that $3.5 trillion or $1.5 trillion bill. Whatever the number is, as I've said before, the problem with that bill is less about the number, because no matter what they spend, it's too much. It's less about the number and more about what they say on the inside of it. And if we allow the Biden administration or the federal government as a whole to be tracking our bank expenditures and require banks to decide if it's okay, well, that just puts us one step closer to that kind of control that over our basic ability to live and have control over our own wealth. And we need to stop it. There's just no excuse for it. There's no reason for it. And we have to tell our Congress to just say no. You'll be getting more on this from us in the next couple of days, but I just wanted to bring it to your attention, make you alerted to it, because this is really bad stuff. I'm planning on writing something today, hopefully published tomorrow. With that, this is Rick Manning. There's lots of stuff going on, and I always appreciate people hanging in there with me. And, once again, there's lots of challenges around the world. There's lots of challenges here at home. And America is the thing we're learning is America truly is the essential country in the world. And this attack on America from within is designed to hollow us out, so that we can no longer be the beacon of freedom that the rest of the world looks to. And that's something which we have to stand up for, we have to fight for. And that's why we keep talking to Congress, because quite honestly, if your Republican legislators aren't yelling really loud about this, how would you expect to be able to pull some Democrats off on it? So unless the Republicans are willing to yell and scream and say no way and be obnoxious about it and fight like AOC would fight, quite honestly, until they're willing to do that, why would you think a Democrat would jump across the aisle and say you're right? So it's time for Republicans to toughen up and understand the world we're in. And that's where you have to come in and explain it to them. Thank you very much for all you do. If you haven't done it before, or if you just want to repeat it, the vaccine mandate is on our website. It's also in that article I referenced, but if you go to getliberty.org, push the button, you can get the vaccine mandate, and just share it with all your friends. Once again, it's more important than ever. Share it with your friends, because we have to win that battle. With that, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.